Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Zombie Train. This is episode number 290. Wow, we've gone a long way. Episode 290, I'm your host, Ellis, otherwise known as Train Man. And this week, we have a question from, I believe it was from Midwestern 261, was it? Or 2716 Productions, or something. It's one of those two. I think it's the same person. Anyway, when was the Zombie Train started? Year. And what year did it end? Well, the Great Panic happened on December 21st, right? 2012. So, that wasn't exactly when it started, but it did start that year. Now, we didn't leave Rhode Island until a couple of days after the Great Panic was in full swing, which sort of let everything die down. We were lucky enough not to be directly situated in an area that was extraordinarily dangerous, but that's because we went to my cousin's house, which is a little bit farther out, to discuss the plan. And so then we left, and by then, there'd been a lot of coverage as to what had happened. There'd been enclaves that had sprung up, and that sort of thing. There was a lot of work that was done, or, a lot of things that happened just in the couple of days immediately after the Great Panic. And I don't know why my mind sprung to work that had been done, because it really wasn't work. It was kind of the opposite. A lot of things were destroyed by that time. Freeways choked with cars. Everything you really expect, or that everyone seemed to expect. Lots of people dead or turned, or both. And, lots of areas that had been looted already. Again, even in the span of a few days. When stuff breaks down, when society breaks down, it breaks down real hard and it breaks down real fast. At least that's what we learned from that. So, before the year's end, so before, 10 days were up, basically, we had the Zombie Train in its initial state. So, it started in 2012. Now, a while ago, I started writing down, I've had, journals and whatnot, but I did write down a very brief timeline, but it ended right when we got talked to by I forget his name, the general that talked us into creating the Zombie Train Incorporated. So, he, and that was where I stopped writing stuff down, because I was like, okay, we're turning a page here. This is going to be documented in a different form, and it was, in more of legal style documents, but now I don't have those. So I just have the original timeline that I wrote, and now we're going on, let's see, almost 25 years after the fact, which is a big deal, because the Zombie Survival Guide predicted that a large-scale outbreak could last around 20 years, and it seemed to be pretty spot on. Things died off, and sort of at the end of the second decade there, and sorry, my mind is slipping. Things sort of died off, and we didn't really go anywhere, as I've talked about. We were supplanted in a couple of locations, but for the most part, the Zombie Train Incorporated still exists in a not as essential form. We used to be very, very essential. So, you can take that as, the Zombie Train still exists 25 years on, or almost 25 years on, and that, well, actually, no. I can't say that accurately like that, because the Zombie Train Incorporated did not start in 2012. The Zombie Train Incorporated started in 2016. So that means we just cracked 20 years a little while ago. Anyway. So, yeah, that's when it started. That was in the beginning of 2016 was when we got handed the Enterprise, which is the Zeppelin. And yes, that thing is still around. It doesn't get out much because it's a pain in the butt to run and you need a crew for it. But, that's when the Zombie Train Incorporated started. Before that, we had, we left Rhode Island in December of 2012. We made contact with Toronto in March of 2013, and then the Pawtucks, which were a group in the north of Rhode Island, in April. A few months later, we made contact with the newly formed Republic of Block Island, or the Islanders, and then the month after that was the Battle of Yonkers. So, that was when things really heated up for us. That's when we got a lot of notoriety. Before, we were sort of doing our own thing, and, just sort of sputzing around the Northeast and a little bit outside of that area, going from town to town trying to stay alive. But when we performed the way we did at the Battle of Yonkers, we got some notoriety with the military, and suddenly we had, people knocking on our doors metaphorically. And that was, that was less than a year after we started. Now, that year flew by, despite the fact that it was sometimes an absolute day-to-day struggle just to get food and fuel and stuff like that. We were really learning, and it's amazing that we didn't all get killed, is really what I am trying to say. Is really what crosses my mind. It's not what I want to say, but it's absolutely true. It's amazing that we didn't blow up the engine. It's amazing that we didn't all get killed. It's amazing that we managed to survive the Battle of Yonkers in the first place, because that was an absolute massacre and a military disaster. And I've talked about that before. But that was that. And then things went quiet for a little while. We had a lot of military stuff that went on, moving some personnel, extending our range a little bit. And then we decided, okay, we're going to work with the Islanders and that sort of thing. So we started expanding our presence off of the railroads. And a little while later, so March of 2014, which is about a month after we made contact with the Republic of Block Island, we went up to Boston. I believe that was the first time we went into Boston proper, which, taking everything we knew from the Battle of Yonkers and that sort of thing, we managed to get in there with a set of sails that we had to bring ourselves, because the USS Constitution only had a handful. Rig the thing with a team of sailors. They were mostly provided by the Islanders, and they, and we stole the USS Constitution from its harbor and brought it down to Block Island. And this was not without problems. Obviously, zombies in, the city of Boston were a huge issue, but we also ran into the Britons for the first time, because they had the same idea. They wanted the Constitution as a decent sailing ship. And they had crossed the Atlantic Ocean in the early months of the year, which is a feat in the Trincomalee. Maybe it was a coincidence, but maybe it was because we knew they knew we were going for it for some reason. And then we expanded our presence at land and at sea. We started going farther south. We ended up going to New Orleans in August of 2014. There was a huge hurricane that year. And because of damages sustained during that and everything that had happened that culminated, we returned to Rhode Island one more time, and then we headed westward. We headed across the pass, Marias Pass, and we arrived in Portland on, I don't know the exact date written down, but it was December of 2014. We stayed there overnight, we stayed there for a number of months, actually. And in the meantime, stuff had happened back home. There was a engagement, which is known locally as the Islander War, between a group that was stationed at Quonset, I think? Yeah. And the Republic of Block Island. The Republic won, and, we returned to Rhode Island with the goal of providing better rail access to deep water ports in Rhode Island that could bring the Constitution in and some other ships that we had acquired. So, and by we I mean mostly the Islanders. They were doing all of our stuff at sea at this time, and while we were out west, the Toronto Rail Lines had handled all of our stuff on land. I cannot thank them enough for filling in for us like they did while we were away. And, I'm just extremely thankful, because I don't know what would have happened without us in the meantime. People are capable of taking care of themselves for the most part, but I won't pretend that we weren't an integral and extremely important part of, everyone's ability to get food and supplies and to move around in at least the Northeast, if not the entire East. So, and that was that. We successfully brought rail back to Newport, the ports in Newport, on October of 2015. And I think that was our last thing. If I am to hazard a guess, it was never explicitly said to me, but if I am to hazard a guess, it was that last thing that keyed the Navy into, we are a big deal right now. We're doing huge things. They were probably skeptical of what we could do, despite the fact that we had hopefully impressed them at Yonkers years earlier, and we had been doing our assignments as best we could, the things that they asked us to do. And I hope that was the turning point, because then suddenly we had a very well-connected land and sea presence in the Northeast, and in not the Middle East, but sort of the Mid-Atlantic area around D.C. We had another group down there. And we had, we were running a number of ships at that point, and all sailing vessels, I believe, at this point, except for maybe the Liberty. I don't remember if we had the Liberty at that point. I can't recall. But we got that fairly early on because it was operable. And you could, we refitted the thing to feed coal. But, that was the biggest issue with that is, we have to figure out how to fit coal bunkers into this thing, because we know some of them were built to run coal, and they were not very different, but this one doesn't. Neither of the surviving Liberties are coal-fired Liberties, and they never were. Those were the ones that were sent to Britain, originally, because they had coal reserves and not oil. Anyway, little historical tidbit right there. So, yeah, at the tail end of 2016, or 2015, what was that? I just had it open. At the tail end of 2015, that's right, we were approached by the guy who was previously, I think, the third highest ranking general of the U.S. Army before World War Z broke out. One of the highest ranking officials left. And he asked us, and me specifically, if we would be interested in a partnership between the U.S. Navy government and the zombie train. And if we thought we were up to the task of being able to field a much larger fleet of locomotives and basically get a lot of things moving, support the war effort, and, basically repair the economy, change it from being the subsistence farming that a lot of people were doing to a regular old commerce economy again. So, it was a huge task. I wasn't sure if we were up to it, but in the end it worked out. And that's the really abridged version of it. I've talked plenty about all of the hardships that we had to deal with, all of the engines that we had to get. The day-to-day was, in some ways, absolutely excruciating, because you had people spread across the country that you might not even have decent lines of communication with. You know, we were flying blind for a lot of the Zombie Train Inc. But anyway, that's our timeline for the Zombie Train itself, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, post them below. Trainman out.